Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be taking a deep dive today into a story that's pretty unsettling, really.
Yeah.
And sadly, it feels like it's become, almost commonplace these days.
Right.
We're talking about that kind of deep frustration that a lot of folks are feeling with the American healthcare system.
Right.
And sometimes, the extreme consequences that frustration can lead to.
Yeah. It's a really complex issue, and it has some pretty deep roots. And this event that happened recently really kind of brings all of that to light.
Yeah, for sure. So, on December 4th, Brian Thompson, he was the CEO of United Healthcare, he was murdered.
Wow.
And the suspect in the case is Luigi Mangione, and he left behind this, it's really chilling, message, right?
Oh, okay.
It was etched on the shell casings, the words deny, defend, depose. And then, of course, it turns out that he also left behind a manifesto, and it's basically, just a really scathing indictment of the entire healthcare industry.
Oh, yeah. And it's crucial that we remember, of course, that, we condemn this violence. We condemn it in the strongest possible terms. Murder is never acceptable.
Right.
But this case does, I think, give us this opportunity to really dissect some of these larger forces that are at play. We have this individual pain, we've got societal frustration, and then that kind of dangerous allure of radicalization.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to be clear, we're not here trying to justify what Mangione did.
Right.
But we do want to kind of wrap our heads around, what could lead a person to do something so desperate? Like what takes you to that point? And, we know that Mangione was a University of Pennsylvania grad.
Okay.
He struggled with chronic back pain. He had some professional setbacks. So it's not hard to see how, those kinds of things help Ben.
Yeah.
Physical suffering, and then on top of that, you've got the financial strain, medical bills and all that.
Yeah.
And then you start to feel like all these injustices are piling up. And, it just seems like a perfect recipe for anger and resentment to just fester.
Yeah, totally.
And it looks like Mangione, he actually found a really, really twisted inspiration
Okay.
in figures like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
Wow.
Yeah, he even references him in the manifesto.
It's a really disturbing connection to make.
Yes.
And it really points to how dangerous it can be when violence gets almost romanticized.
Right.
Especially when it's framed as like this appropriate response to systemic problems. I mean, we've seen this kind of pattern throughout history where you have these individuals who convince themselves that violence is the only way that they can make any change happen, and they often point to people like Kaczynski to justify what they're doing.
Yeah. But, the reality is that violence just leads to more violence. I mean, it just totally undermines any chance at having a real constructive dialogue or, coming up with meaningful reform. And the source material really, I think, makes a compelling case for the sanctity of life.
Yeah.
And how important it is to uphold the rule of law. We have to consider the ripple effects that taking a life has. It's not just about the person who was murdered, it's about their family, their community.
Right.
And how this kind of event erodes the trust that we need to have in our society, for it to function.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is not, just some theoretical philosophical debate that we're having here.
Yeah.
It has real world, serious real world consequences. I mean, you just have to look at the assassinations of, people like President Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
These acts of violence didn't solve the problems, they just created new ones. And they deepened divisions and left these lasting scars, on the nation's psyche.
Right. And it's not just historical figures. I think about this a lot. Like, what message are we sending to our kids? When we downplay how serious murder is, or God forbid, even try to justify it in some way, would we ever want our own kids to think that violence is an acceptable solution to their problems? No way.
Absolutely not.
We have got to be teaching them and reminding ourselves that there are always other paths.
Right.
Paths where dialogue is prioritized, where empathy is valued, and where human dignity is respected.
I couldn't agree more. We all have a responsibility to model those values, both in our own personal lives and, out there in the public sphere. We have to be vigilant, and we have to call out harmful rhetoric,
right?
Whether it's coming from politicians or media personalities or even, our own friends and family.
Absolutely. And it's not enough to just, condemn violence.
Yeah.
We have to actively promote and support alternatives.
I think that's where the real work begins, and it's definitely something we can dig into more in the next part of our deep dive.
So I guess the big question then is, where do we go from here?
Right.
Like, if violence isn't the answer, then what are the alternatives?
Yeah.
And reading through the source material, one thing that really stood out to me was how they highlighted these, like, truly inspiring historical figures
Right.
who face these immense challenges, right?
Yeah.
But instead of turning to violence, they chose these paths of courage and resilience.
It's amazing, really, to look back and see how they dealt with their situations. I mean,
Yeah.
think about Harriet Tubman risking her life over and over again to help people escape slavery.
Yep.
Or Rosa Parks, just one single act of defiance, and look at the movement it sparked. And Nelson Mandela, I mean, spending decades in prison, unjustly in prison,
Right.
and then coming out and guiding South Africa toward reconciliation. They all faced enormous pressure. They had so many people against them, yet they stood by their principles,
Yeah.
and they found ways to bring about change peacefully.
It's really incredible, isn't it? Like, their stories are so powerful. And I think they really show that progress is possible without, resorting to bloodshed. And the thing is, they didn't all follow the same path,
Yeah.
Like Tubman, she took direct action, right? Putting herself in danger. Parks, she used civil disobedience. Mandela, he was more about combining, legal strategies with powerful speeches and community organizing. I mean, it just shows you the range of approaches that are out there.
It's really interesting because even though their methods were different, what they all had in common was this unwavering commitment to human dignity.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what's missing in Mangiane's whole narrative. Instead of trying to lift others up
Right.
or empower them, his actions, they were driven by this anger
Yeah.
and this desire for revenge. I mean, it's a pretty stark contrast.
It really makes you wonder, what if Mangione had channeled all that frustration into something positive? What if he had, drawn inspiration from these figures instead of someone like Kaczynski?
Yeah, it's hypothetical, but it's a really interesting question, and it kind of makes you think, what are we doing as a society to give people those positive outlets,
Right.
For their anger and frustration? Are we doing a good job of helping them channel those emotions into something constructive? Or are we, without even realizing it, creating an environment where this kind of radicalization can take root and spread?
Man, that's a huge question. And it's not just about personal responsibility, right? I mean, it's about changing the systems too.
Yeah.
I mean, the source material really points out that our healthcare system, it's incredibly complicated.
Oh, for sure.
And a lot of times it just fails to meet the needs of everyday people. I mean, you've got rising costs, limited access,
Yeah.
all the bureaucratic hoops you have to jump through. It's easy to see how someone like Mangione, someone struggling with a chronic condition, can just feel trapped
Yeah.
and desperate,
And I think that feeling of being trapped, of having no control over your situation, that's like the key ingredient
Right.
in that recipe for radicalization. When people feel like no one is listening, that the system doesn't care about them, that's when they start to become more vulnerable to these extremist ideologies that offer this sense of purpose and control, even if it's, a false sense.
So then how do we break that cycle? How do we create a system that's actually responsive to people's needs and doesn't breed that kind of desperation?
It's definitely a multifaceted challenge, but I think the source material does offer some possible solutions. Like, for one thing, we absolutely need to make sure people have better mental health support.
Yeah.
We have to give people healthy ways to process their pain, their frustration, and those who are really struggling, we got to make sure they have access to the resources they need.
Okay, so it's about building a more empathetic, supportive society. And it's about fixing those systemic issues in healthcare
Yes,
that are driving so much anger and distrust.
exactly. We have to figure out how to make healthcare more affordable, more accessible, get rid of all the bureaucratic hurdles,
Right.
and make sure that the focus is truly on the patient's well-being, not just how much profit can be made. It's a tall order, for sure, but it's essential if we want to live in a society where people feel heard, feel valued, and empowered to seek change through peaceful means.
And I think we can't underestimate the power of education here. We need to be teaching our kids, starting from a young age, about empathy, conflict resolution, constructive dialogue. We got to help them develop critical thinking skills so they can tell the difference between fact and fiction and resist those extremist ideologies.
Yeah, those are such essential skills for navigating the world we live in today.
Right.
And it's not just about what they learn in school, it's about the conversations we have at home, the media we consume, the role models we choose to celebrate. It's about creating a culture where violence is never seen as a viable option.
Yeah.
And where peaceful solutions are always the goal.
You know, it all comes back to that idea of hope, doesn't it?
It does.
Even when we're faced with tragedy and frustration, we got to hold on to that belief that things can get better, that we can build a more just and peaceful world.
I think that's so important. And that hope, it's not naive or anything.
Right.
It's fueled by the countless people and organizations out there working so hard to make a difference, to fight for change, and to create a future where violence isn't the answer. Those are the voices we need to amplify.
For sure.
Those are the stories we need to tell. Because in the end, it's the stories we choose to believe in that will shape our future.
And speaking of stories, the source material also brought up this worrying trend of certain public figures kind of downplaying how serious this murder was.
Oh, wow.
Even making jokes about it. It's almost like they're contributing to this culture where violence is becoming normal, or even trivialized.
That's a really dangerous trend, and I think it points to this bigger problem of accountability. We need to be holding our leaders accountable, the media accountable, even ourselves accountable for the language we use and the messages we send. Words are powerful, and when they're used carelessly, they can have terrible consequences.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, avoiding offensive language. It's about promoting a culture of respect, empathy, understanding. It's about recognizing that violence, no matter what form it takes, is a failure of our collective humanity. And it's about choosing to be part of the solution, not the problem.
It's a choice we all face every single day. And those choices, the big ones and the small ones, they'll determine what kind of world we leave behind for the next generation.
That's a really good point to pause on, I think.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot in this conversation, and it's given me a lot to think about, for sure.
It's been a tough conversation, but an important one.
Yeah.
And I hope it's made our listeners do some soul searching as well.
It's funny, as we've been talking about all this, I keep coming back to that detail with the shell casing.
Right.
Deny, defend, depose.
Yeah.
It's chilling, It almost feels like Mangione was trying to make this statement about like some kind of righteous rebellion.
Right.
But it just comes across as so cold, so calculated.
It is a chilling example of how twisted someone's thinking can become and how that can lead to these just horrific acts. And I think it really underscores how important it is to understand the psychology behind violence.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just about anger or frustration, it's about this breakdown of empathy, this loss of connection to like our shared humanity.
It's almost like he dehumanized his victim.
Right.
Just reduced him to this symbol of a system that he hated.
Right.
But in doing that, it's like he dehumanized himself too.
Exactly.
Crossed this line that, you can't come back from.
And that's such a crucial point. Because when we dehumanize others, we diminish our own humanity in the process.
Right.
And it creates this slippery slope that can lead to, justifying all kinds of violence and cruelty.
So then how do we fight that?
Yeah.
How do we foster empathy and understanding in a world that, let's face it, often feels so divided, so polarized?
It's a really tough question, and I don't think there's any easy answer, but I think it starts with recognizing that we are all connected. We might come from different backgrounds, have different beliefs, different experiences, but we all share this common humanity. And I think that shared humanity, that should be the foundation for how we interact with each other, not our differences.
I love that, focusing on that shared humanity. It sounds so simple, but it's so powerful,
It is.
And it's something we can all practice every single day. Like listening to someone who has a different point of view than you, really trying to understand where they're coming from, or offering help to someone who needs it, or just, choosing kindness over judgment. Those little acts of empathy, they can like ripple outwards, They can help create a more compassionate and understanding world.
Absolutely. And it's not just about what we do as individuals.
Right.
It's also about creating systems and structures that encourage that empathy and understanding, like promoting access to quality education for everyone.
Yeah.
Fostering economic opportunities, making sure everyone has a say in the decisions that affect their lives.
So it's about creating a society where everyone feels valued,
Yes.
respected, no matter their background, no matter what they believe.
Yeah.
A society where everyone has the chance to thrive, to contribute.
Exactly. And I think when people feel valued and respected, they're less likely to resort to violence or extremism. They're more likely to engage in real dialogue, to try and find common ground,
Right.
and to work together to find solutions to problems.
That's a future worth fighting for sure.
It is.
And it reminds us that even when things are dark, even when we're faced with tragedy,
Yeah,
there's always hope. Hope that we can learn from our mistakes,
absolutely.
that we can build a better world, that we can choose peace over violence.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And, on that note, I think it might be time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today. From this senseless act of violence to the bigger issues of healthcare and just the frustration that people are feeling
Yeah.
and the importance of empathy and understanding.
It's been a heavy conversation for sure,
But
a really important one. And I hope it's left everyone listening with a renewed sense of hope and a commitment to building a more just,
Yeah,
more compassionate world.
I do too. And I want to leave our listeners with one last thought. The world is full of darkness, there's no doubt about that, but it's also full of light.
Right.
And it's up to each of us to decide which path we're going to follow. Choose wisely, choose hope, choose love, choose peace.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay hopeful.